In this lecture, we are going to discuss common communication challenges that we face as engineers. And it really goes hand in hand with the previous lecture where we talked about why this is valuable. This is the other side of the coin where we're going to talk about why this is hard. The previous lecture might be the one that you needed to see. This is why you should commit to this. This is why you should invest time into it. When you get done with this lecture, you might want other people to watch it. And you say, hey, you think I'm being difficult? Look how hard it is. And both are probably accurate. Together, they position us well to talk about audience analysis, which we'll do in the next lecture. And they're all going to revolve, we'll do some bullet points, they're all going to revolve around the simple reality that our work is abstract and complex. And figuring out ways to communicate it to someone who has no background and no context, we have to be simple and concrete. And that is just hard. So the first thing that we have to overcome, or the first challenge we face, is the use of jargon. And if you're not a native English speaker, jargon might be jargon to you. It's simply a word that means a specialized terminology, maybe vocabulary, maybe acronyms that a specialized sort of group of people use, usually professional. And jargon is good. Let me say that up front. We need jargon. It is very, very valuable. How so? Well, if you are a senior engineer, you work as a DevOps, and I say AWS to you, I just communicated in a few letters a massive amount of information. You have a whole construct or context to work with where you know what cloud computing is. So we don't have to talk about any of that. You know how some of the services work, S3, EC2, RDS, maybe data lakes and machine learning, etc. And I did it in a few letters. If you don't know what that stuff is, and you probably don't, again, unless you're a DevOps or a senior software engineer that uses AWS, it's jargon that would take me weeks to explain, and I probably couldn't do a sufficient job. So we need it. It's important, but it has a tendency to create a massive language gap. The other person, the non-technical stakeholders, they're going to feel lost or maybe like an outsider. For instance, a worst case scenario, it might make them feel foolish. In my early days as a web developer, I was sitting in a meeting. I was the new guy. It was with the marketing team. So this is marketing jargon. But we're discussing a project, and the marketing people are dropping SEO, CRM, A/B testing, above the fold. And I'd never heard of any of those. I had no idea what they meant. But rather than ask and say, hey, I don't know what that term means, I just nodded and I pretended that I knew. Because I didn't want to be the guy that, oh, Rob doesn't know what's going on. He's obviously not, he doesn't belong on this team. Why did we hire him, right? I'm sure they wouldn't have done that. But that's a tendency that people have is, again, feeling like an outsider. I don't want to look foolish, so I won't say anything. And I was totally lost the whole meeting. So jargon is good, but creates a challenge because when you have a setback or troubleshooting, you can't use it. And you're used to. You have regulatory issues that complicate even more the language that you want to use. Number two, if we get past jargon, right, you're not going to use the loaded terms, AWS or whatever, and we have to get back to the reality, as I mentioned before, complex and abstract is our work. We have to figure out ways to be concrete and simple, and that is just plain hard. Going from a person who has no context, no background, no space, even without jargon, how do I communicate to them system architecture, big O notation, gear ratios, melting thresholds, whatever it is that I've spent years learning about and working with on a daily basis practically and theoretically without jargon? How do I bring this person up to speed? Spend weeks? No, obviously not practical. If we get past that and we figure out a simple way to say things, we run into the issue of concise versus descript. And then as an added bonus, I'm going to put / precise. By concise, I mean, how can we keep from overwhelming someone? Because the tendency, at least mine, is to always share a lot, to be detailed so the other person knows where I'm coming from, knows what I'm talking about. For instance, if I want to write a proposal for my boss and say, hey, we should spend money on this, we should buy this machine, or we should get this software or this service, I want to be as descript or detailed as I possibly can so that he can make a good decision. I also don't want it to turn out a bad decision and my boss comes and says, Robbie, why didn't you tell me about this? Or I didn't know this was true. You should have done a better job explaining, right? So I'm just going to be detailed. I'm going to give way too much information, and that gives a feeling of being overwhelmed to the other person. So how can you be concise? Abraham Lincoln was an American president. If you're not American, he was the president during the American Civil War. And a quote that he had, or I guess rather he wrote it in a letter to a friend that I have always loved. He started off the letter by saying, "I'm sorry I wrote such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one." And yes, you heard me right. I'm sorry I wrote a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one. It seems backwards, but in order to communicate what you need to and trim all the fat, that takes a lot of time. And if you're one-on-one with somebody, or you're in a meeting, or you're writing an email, a lot of times you don't have time to be really concise and still detailed, so the tendency is to go too far. This other one, precision or maybe accuracy, how as an engineer can you share enough and still feel like you did your job, or you were, I guess you were honest and accurate about your profession, and how much can you let go? So if somebody says something back to you, do you need to correct them? Do you spend time catching them up? So, oh, what you just said is not true. This is actually what's true, right? What level of precision that goes into these same two, being concise, being descript, and then being precise. Big challenges with non-technical people who are not familiar. Number 4, if we can get past all of these other things, we figure out, okay, I'm not going to use jargon. I've simplified this down and I've educated the person. I've been concise without being overwhelming, and I've achieved an acceptable level of precision. We have diverse audiences that we are going to have to talk to, meaning you might have to package this multiple ways because you're going to talk to the sales team. You're going to talk to your non-technical boss. You're going to talk to your kind of technical boss. You're going to talk to your peers. You're going to talk maybe to an international audience. Maybe you have a presentation for the offshore team in the United Kingdom. Maybe you have to talk to an Indian salesperson and then an American salesperson. And, the illustration that I was going to use was American football. I'm going to have to figure out how cricket works to talk to the Indian person, or whatever it happens to be. This just makes everything, multiplies all of these other issues. Number 5, I am going to put over here. Our abstract work a lot of times is best communicated. I'm going to put an arrow here with illustrations, and I mean literal illustrations. Like if you're a mechanical or a civil engineer, you might have schematics or some kind of diagram. As a software person, there's a reason I'm behind this board drawing, because it's so much easier to communicate things in a concrete way with an actual drawing, concepts and stuff. And again, if you need schematics and you're talking to someone, how do you communicate that? How do you say, look at this diagram that I don't actually have, this is how it works, or whatever. So we lose that in an email, in a presentation. Maybe you've got slides and you can sneak some of that in, but even explaining how those things work can be difficult. Number 6, we get past all of this other stuff, and then we have the simple reality that technology changes fast. And whether we like it or not, in the middle of a project, or maybe even at the beginning, maybe right at the end, we have to go and explain to somebody, hey, MySpace, right? Something big just happened and everything broke and I have to update it, and I'm sorry, it's not my fault. The technology just changed. As a software guy, I deal with this all the time. I probably would argue that software changes the fastest, though I could probably I would submit to maybe hardware or some other area. We are all affected by this. And decisions that the industry leaders that are making our technologies are using sometimes will cause problems, and we have to deal with that in communicating it again to our stakeholders, to our bosses, etc. We could add more to the list, but no matter how you say it, it is simply difficult, and there are many challenges that we face. It is worth spending time on this because you've got a couple options, right, to handle all of this stuff, and we'll continue to talk about this. You can either catch the other person up, so teach them the jargon, Get them up to speed on how complex and abstract, right? Get them to the point where they understand what you're talking about. Get to where you can be concise because you don't have to spend lots of time talking, and you're always precise because they know the jargon and the complexity. You get past all of this stuff by simply bringing the other person up to your level of expertise. That's nonsense. You're not going to be able to do that. That's not practical. Second option is you can simply ignore it. Just use your jargon. Let them get lost. Let them feel like an outsider. Just communicate your complex ideas, and who cares? Okay, that's also a terrible option. You should absolutely not be considering that. The third is to become a better explainer. Learn how to consider your audience well and figure out ways to package this in an effective way. And that is what we are going to go after in the next video.